Hello friends and welcome back. In this lecture we are going to discuss about IIB and SIB. So this is important to know about this feature in Java which allows to have instance initialization block which is called as IIB. So the purpose of IIB is to initialize objects. So we already seen constructors can do the initialization of object, but IABs are used to initialize all the constructors. If you have multiple constructors, you can have an IAB in which you can initialize all of the code for the constructors. So we will see when the practical for this section will come. At that time, you will be able to fully understand how the IAB is working. For theoretical aspects, and let us discuss more. And here we can see one more thing about IIB is IIBs are invoked before the constructors. So whenever there is a constructor and IAB, the IAB will be invoked first, then the constructor will be invoked. So during object creation part, we have to remember that. Then next thing is the syntax of IAB. So IAB will be declared in the class body, and in the class body we will have the IAB. The syntax is like a braces followed by the whatever the statements we want to execute in the initialization block. So that's it for IAB. Now let us see SAB. SAB means static initialization block. So this is a block in which we will initialize our static members. So static members we already seen that are class based members. So that belongs to the class. So static members has to be initialized in some context. So in that case we will use SIBs. One thing about need to know about SIBs is SIBs are invoked when the classes are loaded into the memory. So we don't need to create an object or construct an object in order to invoke SABs, whereas IABs are invoked when we create an object and SABs are invoked when the class is loaded into the memory. So now let us see the syntax for SAB. So SAB syntax is like the static keyword followed by the braces in which we want to initialize our static members. So this is it for the theoretical aspects regarding the IAB and SAB. Now let us see the practical for this section. Now let us see a program based on IABs in Java. So IAB, instance initialization block are used to initialize particular instances, and when we create an object, we can initialize those objects using the IAB block. So here I have created a new object which is student object, and the student object I have created three fields: ID, name, and branch. And I'm using the initialization block to print the message and initialize the variables. Here you can see in this part I am initializing the variables, and after that I am declaring the constructors for for this class, and the constructors are default constructor, parameter is no are constructor I will declare, a parameter is constructor also I will declare. So that's how here we can see here in this code this is how we will declare an initialization or instance initialization block. Now let us see the main method for this program. So in the main method of this program, we will be calling the student object, creating a student object here, and I can see when the student object is created, and the constructor will be invoked, and before the constructor is invoked, the IABs will initialize the variables. So IABs will be calling before the constructor, and it will execute the initialization part correctly, so that if we again if you are trying to create an object at that time also the IABs will execute. If there are multiple IABs in a program, then it will execute in a top down fashion. So if three IABs are there, then the first IAB according to the from the top how it is positioned, that position it will execute. And we can have multiple IABs and constructors in a program to initialize an object. Now let us see the output for this program. Here you can see the IAB block is printing before each constructor is getting invoked. So it is initializing the variables. When we print the variables, it is printing the initialized code, and this is how we will use IABs. We will come with another program. Now let us see a program for SABs in Java. So static initialization block we had explained. Now let us see a program for that. So here in this program I have created a employee object. Employee has ID and salary and a static field of minimum salary. So I am initializing the minimum salary field in the static initialization block. Here you can see the syntax for static initialization block. Static followed by the braces. In that we will write the code to initialize the variable, and after that I am created a constructor. In the constructor it's a parameterized constructor, and in the constructor I am initializing the salary to the minimum salary. Like that we can do, and this is a use case of static initialization block. And finally in the main method I will have create an object for this employee, and I will initialize the values using the constructor. And let us see the output of this program. Here you can see the output as screen. The static initialization block is called. So if static initialization blocks are important to understand, they are called when we create when we load the class into the memory. So we don't need to even create an object in order to load the particular static initialization block. They are loaded when the class is loaded into the memory. So we have to think about that. Now let us see another program. Now let us see a simple program to explain both static initialization block as well as instance initialization block. In this program, you will have multiple SIBs and IIBs, so that you will be able to grasp the concept fully in this program. So here we can see I have created a vehicle class. In the vehicle class, I have created two fields, color and name, and after that I have a static field also here. And after that I am using a static initialization block to initialize the static variable. And after that I am put another static initialization block and instance initialization block. So you can see this program. Please take time to see this program, how I am written the code. And in this code I'm just using this multiple SIBs and IABs, so that our variables will be initialized in a certain way. So IABs and SIBs can be used together. The thing to remember about SIBs is SIBs will be loaded only once per once a class loading happens. At that time the SIBs will be loaded into the memory. So only once it will create into the memory. And to understand about it like that. And the next thing which you need to understand about SABs is, if there are multiple SABs, then it will execute in a top to bottom fashion. So the first SAB which is in the first line will execute first. Like that it will work. The next thing which you need to understand is, if SABs and IABs are grouped together, SABs will execute first, then IABs, and then the constructors will execute. So that is the order of execution of these blocks. Now let us see the output. And before output, you will see to the go to the main method. I have created two vehicle objects, and I'm calling. Using the constructor to call to initialize the objects. So let us see the output for this program. So here you can see initially static initialization blocks are called, then later IAB's instance initialization blocks are called, and after that the constructor is getting invoked. So for the second case, second object when I create, at that time the static blocks are not called, because the static members are only called per class loading. Once the class is loaded into the memory, only once in the program, so only once it will execute. That's it for this session on lecture on static initialization block and instance initialization block. So in this lecture we have learned about how we can use these blocks to initialize variables inside our code. We already have constructor to initialize, but static initialization blocks and instance initialization blocks are used to, for example, static initialization blocks are used to initialize if there is a database connection and you want to initialize the only once per loading, class loading, you want to initialize a string or something. At that time you will use the static initialization block. And instance initialization block is used whenever, if for common code for constructors, if there are multiple constructors and you want to initialize all the constructors at once, at that time we can write this logic of instance initialization block. and and this is how this part. And thank you for watching. Please continue watching the series.